The application arrived at the Galactic Transit Authority on a Wednesday, and it landed in Orith's processing queue between a routine fuel route amendment and a cargo manifest correction that she could have handled in her sleep. Orith read it once. She read it again. Then she set it down on her desk and stared at the far wall for a length of time her colleagues would later describe as unsettling, which was notable because VETH administrators were not generally the kind of people who got unsettled by paperwork. The application was from a human vessel, the ISV Persistence, registered out of Kepler Station, Human Colony, Outer Rim, and it was requesting a transit permit for the Dead Rift. Crossing, all 340 light-years of it, round trip, estimated duration 14 days, crew of 5. Orith had been a permit clerk for 200 years. She had never seen a rift crossing application. She called her supervisor, whose name was Vel, and Vel read the application and called the department head without saying anything, and the department head called the Mile Collective Liaison, a short grey creature named Suam who had co-authored 3 of the definitive papers on the rift impossibility theorem and who, upon reading the human permit application, made a sound that did not translate into any known language but communicated, with impressive precision, the emotional state of someone watching a small animal walk cheerfully toward a very large fire. There must be a translation error, Suam said. There is no translation error, Orith said. They have attached a 40-page technical appendix. They have done the math. Suam took the application back and read the appendix, not all 40 pages, but enough, and then he set it down and made the same sound again, quieter this time, which was somehow worse than the first time. The math is wrong, he said. The math accounts for 3 modifications to your theorem's foundational assumptions, Orith said, because she was thorough and had already read the appendix herself. The humans believe the theorem is correct under its own assumptions. They believe the assumptions are the problem. The room was quiet for a long time after that. Sora had prepared for the meeting the way he prepared for everything, carefully, completely, and with the specific anxiety of a man who knew that the crew he worked with were going to do what they had already decided to do regardless of how the meeting went, and that his job was to make it look like a considered decision rather than an inevitability. He sat across a long table from 4 VETH administrators, 2 Mile representatives, and 1 Oran elder who had not moved or blinked since Sora entered the room, and he presented humanity's case for the rift crossing in clear, respectful, carefully prepared language for 40 minutes. The VETH asked 17 questions. All 17 were, in different grammatical clothing, the same question. Asterisk, why are you doing this asterisk? The Mile impossibility theorem, the senior VETH administrator said, and his voice had the quality of stone, not hostile, just dense and final, has been peer-reviewed by every major spacefaring civilization with transit capability. It has 600 years of observational support behind it. It is not a hypothesis, it is a mathematical fact. We identified 3 assumptions in the foundational model that we believe are incorrect, Sora said. The Mile authored that theorem. Yes, Sora said, we have significant respect for their work. We disagree with 3 of their assumptions. The room was quiet in the specific way rooms go quiet when something unprecedented is happening and everyone present is aware of it, and no one is quite sure what to do with the awareness. The Oran elder had still not moved. Sora felt a hand on his shoulder. Woojin had been standing behind him for the entire meeting without saying a single word, and now he leaned down and spoke very quietly into Sora's ear. Tell them we are going regardless, Woojin said. The permit is a courtesy. Sora kept his face very still. Captain, I don't think that particular framing is. Tell them. Sora looked back at the table of administrators and translated this, diplomatically, as, the ISV Persistence intends to proceed with the crossing. We are filing this permit as a gesture of good faith and in full respect of galactic transit protocols. We would prefer to have the authorities' blessing. The part he did not say out loud, asterisk we will proceed either way asterisk, communicated itself without any help from him. After the meeting, as Sora was collecting his documents and quietly recalibrating his understanding of his own stress capacity, the Oran elder appeared at his side without any apparent transition between being across the room and being right next to him. The elder was very old. All Oran were old by human standards, biologically immortal, carrying their years the way water carries sediment, invisibly but with weight, and he had the particular stillness of a creature that had watched the galaxy make decisions for 4,000 years and was no longer surprised by any of them. He spoke in his own language, low and measured. Sora had spent 4 months studying Oran linguistic structures because Woojin had told him to prepare for every possible scenario, and so he understood what the elder said, though understanding it and knowing what to do with it were different problems entirely. Asterisk we buried 11 ships in that dark, You are young, go home asterisk. Sora thanked him, formally and in proper Orin, for their counsel. Then he stepped into the corridor, found a quiet wall to stand next to, and called Wu Jin. The Orin Elder, Sora said, has lost 11 ships trying to cross the rift across 4,000 years of attempts. He told us to go home. There was a pause on the line that lasted exactly long enough for Sora to have the small, cautious hope that perhaps this specific piece of information would land differently than everything else had. Add a 2-day buffer to the back end of the route, Wu Jin said. Hannah has been asking for more time on the secondary drive calibration. Sora stood in the corridor. A Veth administrative clerk walked past him, looked at his expression, and kept walking without comment. He filed the amended route. Orith stamped the permit at 1,600 hours that Thursday. It was a routine motion: stamp, log, file, next item. The same motion her hands had made thousands of times without requiring direction from her brain. She had never stamped a rift crossing permit before. She opened Humanity's archive file, which was, as human files tended to be, considerably more eventful than those of civilizations twice their age, and she created a new sub-entry at the bottom of the record. She labeled it, * final attempt, dead rift crossing, ISV persistence, human registry *. She had written those words before, for other species, in other centuries. She was very fast at it by now and very accurate, and she set the file to monitor status and returned to the rest of her queue without allowing herself to think, for very long, about the 11 entries in the Orin record that carried the same label. The ISV Persistence left Kepler Station on a Tuesday at 0800 hours. Dane was at the fueling port arguing with a loading crew about pressure calibration on the secondary feed lines, and her voice carried across 3 docking bays with an authority that did not need rank insignia to back it up. Yuri was on the bridge, running his navigation figures for what Hannah had counted as the 12th time, though she had stopped counting around the 9th out of respect for his process. Hannah was in the commissary with a cold rice ball and a napkin covered in equations, pressing her pen harder as the ink ran low and the numbers got more important. Sora was composing preemptive diplomatic apologies to 3 separate alien administrative bodies, the Veth Authority, the Mile Collective, and the Orin Council, not because anything had gone wrong yet, but because he believed in getting ahead of things. Wu Jin stood at the forward viewport and watched 17 alien observer vessels position themselves at various distances along the departure lane. Veth, Orin, Mal, 2 others whose registry Sora had looked up and found very interesting, all of them quiet, all of them watching the persistence the way you watch something that does not know what it is walking toward. They were very still ships. Wu Jin watched them watching him. Then he walked to the captain's chair and sat down and said nothing, because everything that needed saying had already been decided, and everything that had not been decided yet would be handled when it arrived. The persistence moved toward the dark at a reasonable speed, and nobody on board looked back. Threshold Station was the kind of place that existed because someone had to be last. Every spacefaring civilization had a version of it, the final outpost before the nothing, the last structure with warm lights and breathable air and a commissary that served something approximating food, and Threshold was humanity's version, a small station bolted to a rock at the very edge of map space, staffed by a rotating crew of 12 who spent their 6-month postings staring out at the most famous darkness in the galaxy. The observation deck faced the rift directly. This was, depending on who you asked, either a design flaw or the whole point. The Persistence docked at Threshold at 1,100 hours on the 4th day of the mission, and the station crew came out to the bay to watch the ship arrive the way people come out to watch things that are significant and slightly impossible, not celebrating, not grieving, just present, because some moments seem to require witnesses even when no one is sure what to say about them. Wu Jin shook hands with the station commander, a woman named Yuna who had run Threshold for 3 years and who had the particular settled calm of someone who had long ago made their peace with the view from the observation deck. Everything is loaded, Yuna said. All of Hannah's requests, including the 3 items I had to special order and the 1 item I'm still not sure fits any approved parts classification. The capacitor array, Hannah said, appearing behind Wu Jin's left shoulder with the cargo manifest already in her hand. That one, yes. It's not prohibited. Hannah, it does not appear in any registered parts catalog in the Galactic database. That is not the same thing as prohibited, Hannah said, and she walked past both of them toward the cargo bay with the energy of someone who considered the conversation finished. Yuna looked at Wu Jin. She knows what she is doing, Wu Jin said. Yuna had the expression of someone with more thoughts than she was going to share professionally. 3 alien vessels had positioned themselves near threshold before the persistence arrived: a Veth archive ship, an Oran observer vessel, and a Mile Scout that had placed itself at the extreme edge of sensor range, close enough to record and far enough to communicate, without any words at all, that this was the distance it considered appropriate from something it had already categorized as concluded. The observation deck had a viewport that ran the full length of the room. On one side of the viewport was mapped space, stars, the warm and distributed light of a galaxy going about its ordinary business, familiar constellations that generations of human navigators had named and charted and argued over. On the other side was the rift. The rift was not dark in the way that regular space between stars is dark, that darkness is texture, depth, the implied presence of matter spread too thin to see but present, real, there if you had the instruments for it. The rift was dark differently. It was the dark of absence, the dark of nothing having ever been there, a darkness so complete it had a kind of weight to it, and standing in front of it for long enough produced a specific unease that was difficult to name but very easy to recognize in other people's faces. Dane stood at the viewport for 11 minutes. Then she went back to the engine room and did not come back to the observation deck for the rest of their time at threshold. Yuri stood there for 20 minutes, very still, working calculations in his head that he would not fully commit to his nav console until he was certain, and then he returned to the bridge and ran his figures for the 13th time. Sora stayed for an hour and wrote careful notes in his diplomatic log about the quality of the silence on this side of the viewport versus the quality of silence in normal space, because he was the kind of person who believed that precise observation was the most useful thing he could offer, and because the writing gave his hands something to do. Wu Jin did not go to the observation deck. Hannah found the error in the secondary drives phase coupling at 0200 hours on their second night at threshold, which meant she had been working in the engine room since at least 1800 hours the previous evening and possibly longer, which was not unusual for Hannah but was the kind of thing Dane had. Opinions about and periodically expressed those opinions, and then returned to expressing them again 2 weeks later when nothing had changed. It's a 3000ths variance in the coupling alignment, Hannah said, sitting on the engine room floor with her current napkin in her lap. It compounds over long distances. Over 340 light years it becomes a real problem. Over 680 light years round trip it becomes a serious problem. How long to fix it? Dane said. 6 hours. You have 6 hours. I know, Hannah said. I gave myself 6 hours. That's why I started at 2000. Dane looked at her for a moment. You started at 1800. I wanted extra time. Dane left her to it. Hannah worked through the night with a small toolkit and 3 additional napkins and the specific focus quiet of someone who is having the best kind of conversation, the kind where the other party is a machine and does not argue back, only responds. Wu Jing's personal log entry was timestamped 0310 hours. Hannah found it by mistake at 0330 when she came to the captain's console room looking for the secondary drive performance archive from the pre-mission tests and opened the wrong file. One line was visible on the screen before she understood what she was reading and closed it. She closed it immediately. She stood in the console room for a moment in the quiet. Then she went back to the engine room and told Dane the phase coupling still had a minor variance they needed to recheck, and Dane looked at her and said, "You said it was fixed," and Hannah said, "I want to be sure," and they rechecked it together without either of them saying anything else. The calibration was fine. It had been fine before the recheck. Hannah knew this. She just needed somewhere to be for a little while that wasn't alone. They departed threshold at 0900 hours on a clear morning by station reckoning, which meant nothing to the rift but felt important to say out loud anyway. Yuna and the station crew stood in the observation deck and watched the persistence pull away from the dock, and the 3 alien vessels outside. Repositioned slightly, adjusting their angles the way observers do when the thing they have been watching begins to actually move. Sora was on the comms handling the final transit acknowledgement with threshold control, his voice doing the careful diplomatic work of sounding calm and routine about something that was neither. Dane was in the engine room with her hand flat against the primary drive housing, feeling the vibration change as the ship switched from docking power to full drive, listening to the particular pitch of a machine warming up to do something hard. Yuri had his navigation display open and his figures ready and was not running them again because he had decided, with the specific discipline of someone who knew their own anxious habits, that he had run them enough and it was time to trust them. Wu Jin sat in the captain's chair and looked at the rift on the forward display. It was very large and very dark, and it had been there for longer than any civilization in the known galaxy could remember, and 11 ships had gone into it and none of them had come out the other side. He looked at it for a while. Then he said, "Take us in." Yuri entered the heading. The persistence moved forward into the dark, and the stars behind them got smaller, and then there were no stars at all, and the viewport showed nothing in any direction except the inside of a darkness so complete it looked almost like the screen had gone off. It had not gone off. This was just what the rift looked like from the inside. Wu Jin noted the entry time in the mission log, set the record to continuous capture, and said nothing else because there was nothing useful to say and a great deal of work ahead of them that would require everyone's attention. The persistence went in. The dark closed around it like it had closed around 11 ships before. This time, something was different, though no one on board could have said exactly what, not yet, not from this side of it. They just kept going. Day 1 inside the rift was fine. This surprised everyone, though no one said so out loud. Because saying it would have required admitting that they had expected it to be not fine, which would have required admitting that some part of them had believed the theorem, and no one was ready to do that. The standard drive ran clean, the secondary drive held its calibration, and the darkness outside the viewports was simply darkness, no different, in any measurable way, from very deep space far from any star, except that there were no stars and the instruments confirmed, with flat certainty, that there were no stars in any direction and would not be for the foreseeable future. Hannah updated her current napkin with the Day 1 drive performance figures. The napkin was already almost full. She started a second one. Day 2, the standard drive began losing efficiency. This was expected. The Mile theorem had correctly identified that standard Alcubierre variant drives degraded in the rift's environment, which was part of why the theorem declared the crossing impossible, because no known drive could sustain the crossing on its own and no combination of known drives had ever been sufficient. Hannah's secondary drive was not a known drive. It was her design, built to different assumptions, and when she switched the ship to hybrid mode, standard and secondary running together in a configuration she had worked out on a napkin and then laminated and mounted above her workstation because Dane kept trying to file it somewhere organized, which meant losing it. The combined output stabilized at a level the standard drive alone could never have maintained. Dane watched the output readings for 2 hours without saying anything. Then she said, "It's working." "I know," Hannah said. "I thought the Mile review said it was structurally incoherent." "They did. And they were working from their own assumptions," Hannah said. "Same problem as the theorem." Dane went back to watching the readings. She didn't argue, because the numbers were the numbers and the numbers agreed with Hannah, and Dane had spent enough time around engines to know that machines do not lie, even when their behavior is inconvenient for established theory. Day 3, all external communications went silent. This was also expected. The rift absorbed signal. That much had been documented by every civilization that had ever gotten close enough to measure, and the crew had been briefed, and they had prepared, and they had understood intellectually that there would be a point where the comms went quiet and they would be completely alone inside 340 light-years of nothing with no contact with any other living being in any direction. Understanding it did not make the silence smaller. Sora sat at the communications console for an hour after the last signal dissolved and listened to the static that had replaced it, and then he closed the console and went to find something useful to do, and the something useful he found was writing a very detailed preliminary report for the Galactic Transit Authority that he could not send to anyone, but that gave his hands a purpose. Yuri ran his navigation figures for the 14th time. Wu Jin ate, checked instruments, and did not sleep much, and when he did sleep it was in the captain's chair, which was not a comfortable chair, and nobody commented on this. On day 5, a crack appeared in the viewport of the observation deck. It was small, a hairline fracture in the outermost layer of a viewport designed with enough redundancy to survive stresses far greater than anything the rift was currently producing, and Hannah looked at it for 3 minutes and declared it structurally insignificant and returned to the engine room. By the end of day 5, every member of the crew had been to look at it. Not together. Separately, at different hours, without mentioning to anyone else that they had gone. Dane stood in front of it for 7 minutes at 2,300 hours. Sora stood in front of it for 20 minutes at 0100 and did not write anything in his log about the visit. Yuri went at 0630 before his shift and stood there long enough that his coffee went cold in his hand. Wu Jin went at 1400, in full daylight hours, and stood there for exactly 4 minutes, and then he went back to the bridge. None of them discussed it. The crack was a small flaw in the glass between them and the nothing, and it was structurally insignificant, and looking at it was not rational, and they all went to look at it anyway because human beings, when they are in a darkness they cannot measure, look for the edges of things. Day 6. Yuri's third navigational anchor point did not appear. Yuri had built the second half of his crossing route on 3 gravitational microfluctuations at the rift's far-edge geometry, patterns no one had ever identified because no one had ever stayed in the rift long enough to observe them at the right angle, and Yuri had spent 14 months finding them in archived sensor data from the 11 failed crossings, piecing them together from the edges of other people's catastrophes. The first anchor appeared on schedule. The second appeared 6 hours late but appeared. The third did not appear. Yuri ran the calculation again. And again. He sat with the empty reading on his console and looked at it with the specific expression of someone who has been certain of something for a very long time and is now holding the first evidence that certainty might have been misplaced. 4 minutes passed. The bridge was very quiet. Then Yuri said, "It's not there." Wu Jin did not move from his chair. "What does that mean for the route?" "I don't know yet." The words sat on the bridge. Asterisk I don't know yet asterisk was not something Yuri said, had never said, was not part of any version of Yuri that any of them had encountered in 3 years of working together, and the crew absorbed it the way you absorb something that changes the shape of a room, slowly, without wanting to. Dane left the bridge. She went to the engine room and began talking to the secondary drive in a low voice, not the technical talk she used when she was running diagnostics, but the other kind, the quieter kind she used when she needed the machine to hear her, and Sora watched her go from the doorway and did not follow because he understood, by now, that Dane and the engine had a relationship that did not require mediation. Hannah took Yuri's data at 1900 hours and went to the engine room floor with a new napkin. She did not use Yuri's model. She threw the model out completely and started from the actual observed behavior of the rift's geometry, not what the theorem predicted, not what Yuri's calculations expected, but what the rift was physically doing right now, around them, in real time, as recorded by every instrument on the ship across 6 days of continuous measurement. No one had ever had 6 days of data from inside the rift before. Everyone who had 6 days of data inside the rift had been too busy dying to compile it into a usable model. The crew of the Persistence had 6 days of clean, continuous, comprehensive data, and Hannah had a new napkin and 11 hours and the specific kind of focus that only activates when someone has removed every alternative option and the only remaining move is to be correct. She worked through the night. Dane brought her tea twice and did not ask questions either time. At 0600 on day 7, Hannah walked to the crew quarters and knocked on Yuri's door and waited. He opened it in 20 seconds, which meant he had not been sleeping. She put the napkin in front of him without saying anything. He took it and looked at it. He was quiet for a long time. "This works," he said. "I know. Why does this work? The rift's geometry shouldn't behave like this." "It shouldn't behave like this according to the theorem," Hannah said. "According to what it is actually doing, it behaves exactly like this. I will explain the full derivation when we are out. Right now I need you to fly it." Yuri looked at the napkin for another moment. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his chest pocket and went to the bridge. Hannah went back to the engine room and started napkin number 8. Day 9, Hannah's revised navigation model was working. This was not a small thing. The model had no theoretical precedent, was built entirely from observed in-rift data that had never existed before because no ship had stayed in the rift long enough to collect it, and operated on assumptions about the rift's internal geometry that the Mall impossibility theorem had not simply overlooked but had actively declared irrelevant, because the Mall had run their analysis from the outside and the outside did not show you what the inside actually did. Hannah had 11 napkins now. She had started numbering them. Napkin 7 was the navigation correction that saved the crossing. Napkin 11 was a preliminary theoretical framework for why the rift behaved the way it did, which was a question no one had ever had the data to seriously investigate before, and Hannah was investigating it with the focused energy of someone who knows they are. The first person in the history of the galaxy to be looking at a particular thing and intends to look at it properly while they have the chance. Dane had stopped trying to get her to sleep. The secondary drive was at 140% of its designed output maximum. This should not have been possible. The drive had been tested to 110% during pre-mission qualification, which was already beyond its design specification because Hannah had built margins into the design that she had not fully disclosed in the qualification documents, not because she was hiding anything, but because she had known the qualification committee would not approve a drive they did not understand and she had not had time to explain it to them in a way they would understand before the mission window closed. 140% was beyond even her private margins. The drive was doing something she had designed it to be capable of doing, but had not been entirely certain it would actually do. Dane monitored it with an expression that people who did not know her would have described as calm. People who did know her would have described it differently. Yuri flew by Hannah's model the way some people play music by ear, not following a score but following the feel of the thing, making corrections so small and so constant that they stopped looking like navigation inputs and started looking like something else, like a conversation between a person and a system that was still being understood. The rift's geometry was not fixed. It moved, subtly, in patterns the theorem had classified as noise because they were too small and too irregular to be meaningful from the outside, but from the inside, across 9 days of continuous data, they resolved into something that was not quite a pattern but was not quite random either, and Yuri had learned to read it the way you learn to read weather, not by formula but by accumulated attention. He did not talk while he flew. He had not talked much since day 6. Sora, who had nothing diplomatic to do and no signals to send and no external communications to monitor, had been sitting in the seat beside Yuri's console for most of day 9, not speaking either, just present, because Yuri was doing something that deserved a witness even if neither of them could have articulated why. Sora was also writing. He had been writing since day 4, a full report for the Galactic Transit Authority, comprehensive, formatted in Galactic Standard Protocol, with separate sections in Veth formal notation, Mal technical register, and Auran diplomatic language. He addressed it personally to Orith. He did not know Orith's name or that she existed. He addressed it to the senior permit officer on record for the ISV persistence application because it seemed like the right person to address it to. The report's subject heading read, Asterisk Amendment to File Status, Dead Rift Crossing, ISV Persistence, Status Update, Ongoing Asterisk. He had 5 technical appendices from Hannah attached, photographs of napkins 1 through 7, each labeled in Hannah's handwriting with a heading that was professionally titled and then annotated, in smaller writing underneath, with her actual thoughts about the theorem's authors. Sora had read the annotations. He had included them in the appendix without editing them. He felt they were relevant. Day 10. Wu Jin went to the observation deck. He had not been there since before departure. He stood in front of the cracked viewport for a long time, not looking at the crack specifically, but at the darkness behind it, which was the same darkness it had always been, unchanged by 9 days of the persistence moving through it, because 340 light-years of dark does not diminish meaningfully when one small human ship crosses it. He stood there for about an hour. He did not log the visit. Day 11. 0200 hours. Dane was alone in the engine room. The rest of the crew was either asleep or at their stations, and the ship was in its quietest configuration, running on minimal active systems while the drives did their work, and the engine room had the specific quality of silence that large machines produce when they are operating at the edge of their capacity, a silence that is not actually silence but is rather so full of sound that individual sounds stop being distinguishable and become instead a single continuous presence. Dane had her hands on the secondary drive housing. She had been standing there for 20 minutes, not running diagnostics, not checking outputs, just standing with her hands flat on the casing and feeling the vibration move through her palms and up her arms. The secondary drive had a sound. It had always had a sound. All engines have sounds, and Dane had been cataloguing the secondary drive sound since day 1, logging each one with a name and a cause and a meaning, because machines tell you what they are doing if you know how to listen and you are paying the kind of attention that cannot be automated. The sound changed. It was a small change, a shift in pitch that no instrument on the ship would have flagged as significant, but Dane felt it through her hands before her ears registered it, and she knew immediately what it meant. It meant the drive had found something. Not a failure, the opposite of a failure. It meant the drive had crossed a threshold inside itself, had moved from operating at its designed function into operating at something beyond its designed function, something the design had made possible but had not guaranteed, and it was doing it now, at 0200 on day 11, in the dark and the quiet, with no one watching except Dane. She sat down on the engine room floor, back against the drive housing, vibration moving through her spine. She sat there and did not move for 22 minutes. When Hannah came in at 0230 for the routine output check, Dane was standing again, hands on the console, looking at the readings with a perfectly composed expression. "She's going to make it," Dane said, without turning around. Hannah looked at the output numbers on the console. "Yes," Hannah said. She was always going to make it. The design was always right. Hannah did not answer immediately. She pulled up the readings and began her annotations, and after a moment she said, Quietly, "I know," and there was something in the way she said it that suggested she was not just talking about the drive. Dane did not ask her to clarify. Some things do not need clarification. They worked together in the engine room in comfortable quiet until 0500, when the shift changed and the rest of the ship began to wake up. Day 12. Yuri's instruments registered something. It was faint at first, barely a reading, at the absolute edge of sensor sensitivity, the kind of signal that on any other mission in any other part of space would have been dismissed as instrument noise and logged as such. Yuri did not dismiss it. He had been watching for it for 2 days. He adjusted the sensor array's focus with 3 careful inputs and waited, and the signal strengthened, and then it strengthened again, and then it resolved from noise into data, from data into coordinates, from coordinates into something that the instruments could display on the forward viewer as a visual. A star. Then 3. Then a field of them, dense and various and entirely unmapped. The far side of the rift spread out across the forward display in more detail than any galactic chart had ever shown because no galactic chart had ever been made from this side. Star systems by the hundreds. Visible spectrum only from this distance, but spectroscopic sensors already beginning to flag signatures, planetary bodies, atmospheric compounds. The quiet electromagnetic fingerprints of worlds that had been there all along, completely unreachable, written off by the entire known galaxy as permanently inaccessible behind a wall that everyone had agreed could not be crossed. Yuri stared at his display. He opened the shipwide channel. "Captain," he said. That was all he said. Wu Jin came to the bridge in 30 seconds. Yuri did not say anything else. He turned the forward viewer to full display, the entire viewport filled with the far side of the rift, and the stars were very bright after 12 days of seeing nothing in any direction. Wu Jin stood in front of them for a long moment. No one spoke. The stars were there, and they were real, and the instruments confirmed them, and there were more of them than anyone on board had been ready to see all at once. "Hannah," Wu Jin said. Her voice came over the channel from the engine room. "Already logging it. Log the time." "I said already." Wu Jin looked at the stars. "Good," he said. The ISV Persistence emerged from the far edge of the dead rift at 1147 hours on day 13. There was no one there to witness it. No observer ships, no Veth Archive vessels, no Orin Elders, no Mile Scouts positioned at respectful distances to record the outcome. Nothing but the persistence and the stars and the silence of a region of space that the entire known galaxy had decided, 600 years ago, was permanently inaccessible and had not looked at seriously since. The ship ran a full sensor sweep before anyone spoke. The sweep came back with 317 star systems in visible range. 17 of those had spectroscopic signatures indicating planetary bodies. 8 of the 17 were inhabitability ranges that matched or exceeded the conditions on several currently inhabited worlds in the known galaxy. Hannah read the numbers off her console. Then she said something that was not in the mission log, because she said it before the log capture registered her speaking, and Sora, who was standing close enough to hear it, did not write it down because it was in Korean and it was not the kind of thing that translated well into formal diplomatic documentation, and it was also, he felt, private. "Log it all," Wu Jin said. "Every reading, every system, start with the spectroscopic flags." "Already started," Hannah said. "Yuri, I want a full positional record, every landmark we can chart from here." "Running it now," Yuri said. The bridge was busy in the way that it is busy when everyone is doing something important and knows it, a specific quality of focus motion when no one wastes a word or a movement, and Wu Jin sat in the captain's chair and watched his crew work and said nothing else because nothing else was needed. Sora sent his report at 1230 hours. The comms had come back. Online 40 minutes after emergence, faint at first, signal clarity building as the persistence put distance between itself and the rift's edge, and Sora had been sitting at the communications console watching the signal strength indicator climb with the specific patience of a man who has been waiting in silence for 9 days and has learned to wait well. When the signal was strong enough, he sent the report. All of it, the full transit documentation, the navigation logs, the drive performance data, the revised model of the rift's internal geometry, and the 7 photographs of Hannah's napkins, numbered 1 through 11 now, each one labeled in Hannah's handwriting with a formal heading and then annotated below the heading with her actual thoughts, which Sora had read and chosen to include without editing because he felt, strongly, that the historical record deserved the complete version. The cover transmission was addressed personally to the senior permit officer on the ISV persistence application file, which Sora had looked up before departure and which was, In fact, Orith. The subject heading read, Amendment to File Status, Dead Rift Crossing, ISV Persistence, Status Update, Successful Transit Confirmed, Farside Emergence Logged, Return Crossing Commencing *. He sent it. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling of the communications room for a moment, and then he began composing the second transmission, which was the one he had been thinking about for 9 days and which he had not allowed himself to draft until the first one was sent. It was addressed to the Orin Elder. It was very short. The return crossing took 2 days less than the outbound leg. Yuri flew the rift from memory. Not from a napkin model, not from his recalculated figures, not from any instrument readout. He flew it from memory, because he had crossed it once already and the rift had stopped being an abstract navigational problem and had become a place, with its own character and its own behavior and its own particular way of responding to a ship that knew how to listen to it. He made adjustments to the headings so small and so frequent that the autopilot system, which was tracking his inputs for the mission record, generated a log entry on day 2 of the return asking if he wanted to recalibrate his manual control interface, as the input pattern was outside normal navigational parameters. He dismissed the notification. He adjusted the heading by 3 degrees to the left, then back by 1, then held, then adjusted again, and the persistence moved through the rift like it had been this way before and knew the road. In the engine room, Dane watched the secondary drive output on her console. At 1,400 hours on the second return day, the drive output did something she had not seen before, a brief, clean spike above its current sustained level, lasting 4 seconds, and then a return to normal operating figures. She wrote it in her log, *1400, day 15 total, drive initiated, unprompted, a 4-second efficiency surge, cause under investigation, no instruments flagged it as anomalous, I flagged it, that's enough *. She looked at the housing for a moment. Show off, she said, and she meant it as a compliment, and the vibration through the console casing was steady and even and she chose to take that as acknowledgement. Orith received the transmission at 1803 hours, Veth Standard Reckoning. She was at her desk processing a cargo dispute between 2 mail freight operators when the priority flag appeared in her queue, and she set the cargo dispute aside and opened the transmission, because priority flags from active monitoring files were always addressed immediately. She read the subject heading. She read it again. Then she opened the full report and began reading from the beginning, and she read it the way she read everything, systematically, carefully, without skipping, and she was a very fast reader, and it still took her 2 hours. She read the navigation logs. She read the drive performance data. She read Hannah's revised model of the rift's internal geometry, which was dense and technical and required her to cross-reference 3 separate fields of theoretical physics to fully follow, and she cross-referenced all 3 without skipping any of it because she was Orith and she was thorough. She read the napkin appendices. She read the annotations below the formal headings on each napkin. She sat with the file for a long time after she finished. In 8,000 years of archival record, the Galactic Transit Authority had logged 441 entries under the designation *final attempt *, each one marking a civilization's last crossing attempt at something the data said could not be done, ships that went in and did not come out the other side, or came out pieces, or turned back from the edge before they even entered, which the archive also recorded because the attempt itself counted, because trying and failing was still worth keeping. She had written those entries. All of them, or close enough. She had been at this desk for 200 years, and before her there were others, and the file stretched back further than any living person could personally remember. She had always written them quickly. They were not complicated to write. She looked at the subfile she had created under Humanities Record, the one she had labeled *final attempt, Dead Rift Crossing, ISV Persistence *, and she looked at the closing entry she had begun preparing on day 3 of the mission, the sentence that sat there unfinished. Cursor waiting. She deleted the closing entry. She deleted the label. She sat for a moment more. Then she typed a new label, 3 words in Veth archival notation, a designation she had been taught existed but had never herself used, reserved in the archive system for events that changed the shape of recorded history rather than simply adding to it. She saved the file. She did not move it to the closed archive. She moved it to the active record, the living file, the section of the database that dealt with things still in motion. Then she sent a brief formal acknowledgement to Sora's transmission, 2 sentences in standard galactic administrative language confirming receipt of the transit. Report and requesting that the crew submit a full debrief upon return to Kepler Station. She paused. Then she added a third sentence, in Veth, which was not standard administrative language and was not required by protocol. It said, *, the archive has been updated. The record will be kept as it deserves to be kept *. She sent it and returned to the cargo dispute. The persistence emerged from the near edge of the rift at 0609 hours. 14 alien observer vessels were waiting. More than had been present at departure. Word had traveled fast across the galactic network when Sora's transmission arrived, and an active record designation appeared on a file that everyone in the transit community had assumed would be closed and finalized within the first week. The Veth archive ship was there. The Orin Elder's vessel was there, a ship so old it predated the Mile theorem itself, that had been present for all 11 previous attempts, that carried in its hull the memory of watching 11 ships go in and not come out the way they went in. The Mile Scout was there, repositioned significantly closer than it had been at departure. The persistence came through at 0609 without ceremony, running lights on, hull intact, secondary drive still operational, though Dane had strong and immediate opinions about giving it a proper rest, and Yuri was already logging the exit coordinates before the emergence was complete, because Yuri logged everything at the moment it happened and did not wait. Sora opened a hailing frequency to the observer fleet. Standard courtesy contact, protocol compliant, the kind of formal opening he had been trained to deliver in 5 languages and that he had spent, across 11 days of silence, carefully drafting in his head. Wujing's hand came down on his shoulder. "Don't dress it up," Wujin said. Sora looked at him. He looked at the 14 alien vessels outside. He opened the channel. "Persistence to observer fleet," he said. "We are back, 14 days, round trip, full survey data attached." The channel was quiet for a moment that felt longer than it was. Then the Orin Elder's vessel transmitted. A single symbol, the same one the Elder had sent before departure, the untranslatable word, the one that existed in Orin only for the moment before someone walks towards something irreversible, the word that had no clean equivalent in any other language because most languages had never needed a word for that specific moment. Sora looked at it. He had received this symbol before, had sat with it and turned it over and looked at all its sides, and he had done what he always did with things he could not stop thinking about. He had studied them, read everything available, gone deeper than the formal translation notes and into the structural linguistics and the cultural context and the history of when and how the word was used. And he had found, in the oldest available Orin texts, that the symbol had a second form. A form used after the word you say when someone walks out the other side. It had appeared in the historical record fewer than 30 times. It had never been used in the context of a rift crossing. Sora typed the second form and transmitted it. The Orin vessel was quiet for a moment. Then it transmitted back, not a word, not a symbol, but the Orin equivalent of a nod, a simple formal acknowledgement that meant * received * and * understood * and, in its oldest usage, something closer to * we will remember. This *. Wujin was looking at the viewport. Sora did not say anything to him. He did not need to. Outside, the stars were exactly where they had always been, the same stars, unchanged, the same galaxy that had decided 600 years ago that the crossing was impossible and had been correct under its own assumptions and had simply, in the end, had the wrong assumptions. The persistence held position for a moment among the observer vessels, engines idling, the secondary drive cycling down with a sound Dane was already listening to and logging. Then Wujin said, "Take us home." And Yuri set the heading for Kepler Station, and the ship moved, and behind them the dead rift sat exactly where it had always sat, 340 light-years of dark, unchanged, the same as it had ever been. Except that now there was a path through it. And the path had a name. And the name was already in the archive.